Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again to, dig into some complex topics, try and pull out the key takeaways for you, really help you understand what's actually going on. So today we are plunging into, a piece of industrial infrastructure, the global swing reflux valves market. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the detailed market sales revenue. We're looking at countries, regions, starting back in 2021, looking ahead to 2025, and projecting all the way out to 2033. And importantly, this is all based on solid data from cognitive market research. Okay, so before we get into the weeds, region by region, let's just set that global picture. The swing reflux valves market. In 2021, it generated $763.7 million. That's about $4.76 billion. Now it's expected to reach $5,960.8 million. That's a $5.9 billion by 2025. And then it's projected to grow quite a bit more, hitting $960.3 million over $9 billion by 2033. That represents a compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, of 5.6%. Now, for anyone less familiar, these valves, they aren't just random bits of plumbing. They're really critical. They sit in pipelines, make sure stuff flows one way, stop dangerous backflow. Crucial.
Absolutely crucial.
Yeah, think of them as like the unsung heroes in all sorts of industrial systems, essential for safety, efficiency, everything from water treatment plants to, oil and gas pipelines. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. And that 5.6% global CGR figure,
Yeah.
it's more than just a number, isn't it? It really signals pretty substantial, consistent expansion in a foundational industrial component. But what's really fascinating, I think, is what these growth rates tell us when you break them down, especially the variations, between regions, between countries. It gives you clues about underlying industrial development, infrastructure priorities around the world. So as we go through this data, you should keep asking, what factors might be driving this growth, or maybe slowing it down in different places.
That's a great way to frame it. Okay, so let's start North America. The data shows the market there was valued at $162.4 million in 2021, and it's projected to reach $2,344.5 million by 2033. That works out to a 5.4% CAGR. Pretty solid. The U.S. obviously is the biggest chunk in terms of revenue, no surprise there. But what kind of jumped out at me were the growth rates for Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast, isn't it? The U.S. shows that steady, solid growth. But Canada, its projected CAGR is 6.2%. And Mexico is even higher, 6.3%. Those definitely stand out.
They really do.
It suggests, particularly strong demand for these valves in both countries. For Mexico, we're probably seeing the effects of nearshoring, right? Manufacturing moving closer. That means building new industrial infrastructure, which needs components like these valves.
Makes sense.
And Canada, it's maybe a bit more mature, but you're still seeing strong investment, resource sector, some strategic infrastructure upgrades. So different reasons maybe, but both point to vibrant industrial activity.
Okay, interesting. Let's hop across the Atlantic then to Europe. The market over there was $914.6 million back in 2021, set to grow to $16.7 million by 2033. And the CAGR is also 5.4%, same as North America's overall rate.
Right, 5.4% again.
Yeah.
But yeah, within Europe, you definitely see some real variations. Tells an interesting story about industrial maturity, perhaps.
How so?
Well, you've got Germany, huge industrial base, showing a healthy 5.7% CAGR. Consistent investment there. But then countries like France, Italy, Russia, they're showing slightly lower growth. Still stable, mind you, mostly in the 4.7% to 4.8% range.
Okay.
So that suggests maybe a more mature phase, less explosive growth, but steady, established industrial nations. But then the UK jumps out, an impressive 6.4% CAGR.
Wow, 6.4%.
Yeah, that indicates a period of pretty significant infrastructure work or maybe industrial upgrades are happening.
Oh, interesting.
And then there's the rest of Europe category. That actually posts the highest rate in Europe, 6.9%.
6.9%.
Yep. That points to strong expansion in maybe diverse, smaller European markets. Places really pushing forward with their industrial development.
That's a really powerful insight. Growth isn't always just in the biggest players.
Yeah.
All right, let's pivot now to Asia Pacific. This region really dominates, doesn't it? In terms of market size and impressive growth, it started at $1,800.7 million in 2021, and it's expected to surge, really surge, to $3,761.3 million by 2033, growing at a very robust 6% CAGR overall for the region.
Absolutely. And within Asia Pacific, but China, as you'd expect, leads in market size. And it has a strong 6.2% CAGR. Reflects its massive industrial scale.
Right.
Japan shows respectable growth too. But if you're looking for the kind of the absolute standout in the region, it has to be India.
India.
Yeah, India is projected to have the highest CAGR in this entire data set we're looking at. 7%.
That's huge for a market like this.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that kind of accelerated growth, especially in something like industrial valves, It strongly suggests things like the aggressive Make in India initiatives are having an impact, and substantial government investments in critical infrastructure. Smart cities, industrial corridors, energy projects.
All needing these components.
Exactly. That strategic national build-out directly fuels the need for foundational components like these valves. And you also see other strong performers. South Korea, Australia, they show healthy growth, plus a robust Southeast Asia region, collectively at 6.3% CAGR. So it's pretty broad-based development across APAC.
That's 7% for India, though. It really highlights where some of the big global shifts might be happening.
Okay. Let's move south now. Continent of South America, Brazil is the major player there, right?
Yeah.
And its growth rate seems to mirror the global average, 5.6% CAGR.
That's right. And across South America, generally, we see a picture of, let's say, consistent, maybe moderate growth. Countries like Argentina, Colombia, they show similar rates around the 5.5% to 5.6% mark. Peru and Chile are slightly lower.
So it suggests a steady pace, Industrial activity probably tied to ongoing investment in natural resources, energy, urban development across the continent. It seems less about those dramatic surges we saw elsewhere and more about sustained kind of foundational growth.
Right, steady development. Okay, and finally, let's wrap this regional tour up with the Middle East and Africa. This looks like where we see some of the most varied patterns, really diverse economic situations reflected here.
You're absolutely right. It's quite a mix. Egypt, for example, shows a 4.5% AGR. Turkey follows close by with 4.7%.
Okay, so mid-range numbers there.
Exactly. But then, in really stark contrast, you look at the rest of the Middle East category. It shows the lowest CAGR in our entire data set, just 2.8%.
Wow, only 2.8%. That's quite low compared to others.
It is. And that slower growth might indicate, well, regions facing maybe more localized challenges, perhaps slower industrial diversification efforts, or maybe even geopolitical factors that are delaying large-scale infrastructure investment.
Could be any number of things.
Could be. Conversely, you look at Africa. South Africa posts a healthier 5.5% CAGR, and Nigeria is at a solid 5% CAGR.
Right.
So it really emphasizes how varied the pace of industrial development is within these large, diverse regions. Some areas are clearly prioritizing infrastructure expansion more aggressively than others.
Okay, so let's try and connect the dots here. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of numbers. We've seen this impressive global expansion overall for swing reflux valves, growing from, $4.76 billion in 2021, projected to hit $9.16 billion by 2033. That's that healthy 5.6% CAGR globally. But what really stands out, as you said, are these intriguing nuances, the differences in growth rates across regions and countries. You have these soaring KGRs in places like India at 7%, Mexico at 6.3%, the UK at 6.4%, which kind of hints at strategic national buildouts, maybe new economic frontiers opening up. And then you have more modest increases in parts of Europe and that very low figure in the rest of the Middle East, reflecting maybe industrial maturity in some places or specific regional challenges in others. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Exactly, because when you look at these precise figures, these distinct growth patterns we've just talked about, from India's leading 7%, which, as we discussed, likely points to ambitious national development goals, to the rest of the Middle East, much lower, 2.8%, maybe signaling areas of less immediate industrial investment.
Yeah.
And then the specific performance, like we saw in Mexico or the UK. It raises a really fascinating question, I think. What do these seemingly small components, these valves, actually tell us about the bigger picture? About underlying global infrastructure priorities, about specific industrial shifts happening worldwide, or maybe even about emerging economic powerhouses that we might not typically focus on. It's just a powerful reminder, isn't it, how this kind of micro-level market data can actually reveal these huge macro-level economic stories.
That is a truly thought-provoking question to leave our listeners with, something to definitely mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the numbers, and more importantly, the meaning behind them in the global swing reflex valves market. We hope this has given you a fresh perspective. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at something pretty vital, but maybe not something you think about much. The swing reflex valve. Our mission here is to really dig into the market dynamics, what's driving growth, what the obstacles are, and what's new and exciting on the horizon.
Exactly. And just so you know, all the information we're digging into today comes from a really solid source, Cognitive Market Research. Their analysis is basically the foundation for our chat.
That's right. And, think about clean water from your tap or reliable gas for heating, even how waste flows away from cities. These little component swing reflex valves, they're kind of the unsung heroes making sure all that happens safely. It's actually quite amazing.
Okay.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. What's really fueling the growth in this market? What are the big drivers?
Well, the biggest thing really is the growing need for absolutely dependable backflow prevention, especially in industrial pipelines. Think of them like super important one-way doors for flow.
One-way doors, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they stop the water, oil, gas from flowing backward in the system, which is just critical. It's not just like a nice to have. With regulations getting stricter and the potential costs of contamination or system failure being so high for utilities, petrochemicals, processing plants, these valves are just fundamental. Safety, keeping things running smoothly, preventing contamination, it all relies on them.
Right. So it's beyond just preventing a mess. It's about avoiding potentially massive problems, huge financial hits, even safety catastrophes. That definitely ups the ante. And where else, besides those, big industrial setups, is demand high?
That leads us straight to another major driver, all the expansion happening in water and wastewater treatment infrastructure.
Globally.
Okay, yeah. Governments, cities. They're investing heavily in cleaning water, handling sewage, building out distribution networks. And that steady, large-scale investment, it keeps demand for these swing reflux valves really consistently high. They're popular here because they're, well, generally reliable and don't need a ton of maintenance, which makes them great for those big, sprawling networks managing stormwater, sewage, and even drinking water, especially where gravity does a lot of the work.
Gravity-driven networks, right. So basically water flowing downhill. And these valves make sure it doesn't decide to flow back up again. Simple, but crucial.
And it's not just these massive public works projects, is it? There's a connection to our everyday city life, too.
Absolutely. That's the third big driver, the growth in urban development and just building plumbing systems in general.
Right. New buildings, bigger cities. Exactly. As cities grow, new homes, new offices, you need plumbing systems that are robust, reliable, and swing reflex valves. They're particularly valued in, say, high-rise buildings or buildings with really complex pipe layouts. They're essential for stopping, dirty water flowing back into the clean water supply, whether that's up a tall building or across a large complex.
So putting it all together, what's the big picture here? It really sounds like these valves aren't niche at all. They're kind of foundational, like woven into the very systems that keep modern life running, from giant factories right down to the pipes in our own homes.
That's a good way to put it, foundational.
Okay. But, of course, nothing's perfect. No market, no technology is without its challenges. So what are the main restraints? What holds the swing reflux valve market back sometimes?
Well, one key issue is how they handle environments with a lot of sediment or slurry. Think really gritty fluids.
Okay, abrasive stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Abrasive particles, thick sludge. It can just wear down the valve seals, erode the surfaces inside. So that kind of limits where you can use the standard ones, like some mining applications, certain chemical processes, or really tough industrial wastewater. Unless you go for specialized, toughened up reinforced designs, they might not last.
So the environment itself can be the enemy if the valve isn't built for it. Makes sense. What's another hurdle?
Another one is they don't always work perfectly in low-pressure situations or in, vertical pipes where the flow is going straight up.
Why is that?
Because they mostly rely on gravity and the fluid pressure itself to swing open and then swing shut properly to seal. If the pressure is too low or if it's installed vertically, it might not get that positive seal you need. So in those cases, engineers often choose different types of valves, like spring-loaded ones or lift-check valves, which, naturally means the market for the swing reflex type is a bit narrower in those specific applications.
And what about just practical stuff? Once they're installed out there in the real world, any issues there?
Oh, yeah. Maintenance can definitely be tricky, particularly with the really big ones or how they're installed.
How so?
Well, imagine a huge, heavy swing valve installed horizontally, maybe deep inside some aging city infrastructure, or crammed into a tight spot in an old factory.
Right. Not easy to get to.
Not at all. Just accessing them, let alone inspecting them properly or cleaning them out, can be a real headache. And that means higher maintenance costs, needing special crews, maybe longer system shutdowns, especially in older facilities that weren't really designed with easy maintenance access in mind. It adds up.
Yeah, sounds like some real logistical challenges there. Okay, so those are some of the difficulties. But now let's flip to the innovation side. What are the exciting trends? What's changing? How is the industry moving forward?
Well, one really significant trend is the move towards using more advanced materials.
Mm-hmm.
Composites, better corrosion-resistant stuff.
Like what kind of materials?
Things like specialized stainless steels, high-tech plastic composites, and some really advanced alloys designed specifically to resist corrosion.
And what does that do?
It's a pretty big deal, actually. It means the valves last much, much longer and perform better, especially in really tough environments. Think chemically aggressive fluids or saltwater applications. Using these materials means the valves can be used in way more places reliably.
So better durability, wider applications. That sounds like a solid step forward. What about tech? Are we seeing smart valves now?
We definitely are. That's another key trend. Integrating smart sensors for predictive maintenance.
How did that work?
Companies are actually embedding sensors for flow, for pressure, vibration, maybe right into the valve systems. This feeds data back, allowing for real-time monitoring of the valve's condition.
So it's part of that whole Industry 4.0 thing, getting data from equipment.
Exactly. It plugs right into that. It means you can predict when maintenance might be needed before the valve actually fails, which, cuts down massively on unexpected shutdowns and just makes the whole plant or system more reliable.
That sounds incredibly useful. Moving from fixing things after they break to preventing the break in the first place. So we've got better materials, smarter monitoring. What about efficiency? Is that a focus too?
Yes, very much so. There's a growing focus on designing valves that are more energy efficient, specifically with low head loss.
Low head loss. What does that mean in simple terms?
It basically means the valve causes less pressure drop as the fluid flows through it. It offers less resistance to the flow.
Okay, smoother flow.
Right. And less resistance means you need less energy, less pumping power to move the fluid through the system.
So it saves energy.
Precisely. For a big water treatment plant or a large industrial facility using lots of pumps, reducing that pressure drop, even by a little bit per valve, can add up to significant energy savings. Which is great for costs, obviously, but also helps meet those increasingly important sustainability goals, reducing the carbon footprint of fluid transport.
What's really fascinating here, I think, is how these, seemingly small tweaks in design materials, sensors, flow efficiency can actually have such a huge ripple effect. What part of this whole hidden world stands out to you?
And that really brings our deep dive on swing reflex valves to a close. We've covered quite a bit the key things driving the market, the real-world challenges they face, and these really interesting trends shaping what comes next. We really hope digging into this gives you a shortcut, to being more informed about these critical bits of kit. They're often out of sight, but they genuinely impact so much of how our modern world functions. It's pretty amazing when you stop to think about it. Yeah, and maybe a final thought to leave you with. If you connect all this to the bigger picture, just consider how this constant, quiet evolution of fundamental components, like these valves, really underpins so much of our societal progress. Our whole quest for a more efficient, more sustainable future often relies on getting these basic building blocks right. What other hidden part of our infrastructure, what other foundational technology might you want to explore next?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really encourage you to keep exploring and stay curious.